Congratulations! You made the varsity, the podcast. My name is John Oran, and I am Puck's sports correspondent and the host of this pod. And today, Evan Drellich joins the varsity. Evan is one of the top baseball writers at The Athletic. I read him all the time. We're going to dive into MLB All-Star Week. We're going to talk about the labor war that's threatening the beginning of next season. And we're going to preview MLB's next media deal when those rights come up in 2028. But before we get to Evan Drellich, today is Sunday, July 19th, World Cup final day, and that's what I'm watching. This World Cup has been super successful from every single metric, and that really doesn't come as a surprise to me at all. But it probably does come as a surprise to a lot of people. Remember all those stories before the tournament started predicting a hot mess? Tickets were too expensive, travel was too difficult, geopolitical problems were going to cause a lot of havoc. I don't mean to dismiss all those issues. They are real concerns, but they really had no effect on the World Cup. Just like they didn't have any effect on the World Cup in Qatar 4 years ago, or Russia 4 years before that. In fact, you can set your watch to the stories that are inevitably coming about how Los Angeles won't be ready for the Olympics in 2028. I'm telling you right now, those Olympics are going to be a huge success. They just will be. Anyway, here are a couple things that blew me away. You know the Argentina-England semifinal last Wednesday afternoon? More than 15 million people watched that game on Fox on a Wednesday afternoon in the middle of summer. That's just incredible. Oh, and one more thing on those hydration breaks. They really aren't certain to return 4 years or 8 years from now. I mean, they might, but it's been described to me as more of a 50-50 proposition. I'm told that FIFA officials are torn. Fans outside of the United States, well, they hate these breaks. And believe it or not, FIFA is listening to them. That'll be one of the funnest stories to follow over the next few months. As for now, let's get right to Evan Drellich. Evan Drellich, thank you for joining the pod. I haven't seen you since we were on the field before the home run derby, sweating through our shirts. I want to start with sort of All-Star Week and baseball. I had a story in the varsity this week that I just found the tenor of the All-Star Week, and not just baseball, but the people around baseball, to be really unique the last week, because there's almost 100% of my sources believe that there's going to be a lockout, and 75% of them believe there's probably going to be missed games. Like, and they're sort of expecting it, which in years past would have been like, oh gosh, here we go. But the tenor among media executives, sponsor folks, MLB executives was totally positive, because they're coming in with all this momentum, with ratings are up, attendance is up, sponsorship dollars are up. How did you sort of navigate that? Because it's almost like this dichotomy about, like, yeah, there's a hurricane off the coast, but yeah, we're having a lot of fun right now.
Yeah, it is an odd vibe, to have the commissioner stand up there in front of the BBWA, the Baseball Writers Association of America, and talk about how well the game is doing in ratings and in attendance, and the vibes do seem to be generally good. You're still riding high off of the pitch clock introduction a few years ago. ABS, the challenge system for balls and strikes, seems to be going well here. And then in the background of all of it, you've got this threat of baseball Armageddon, the potential of missed games in 2027 over the fight for a salary cap. And, in a way, everything's a bit performative. In a labor negotiation, one side wants one thing, the other side wants another thing. And, when push comes to shove next spring and next year, we'll see how bad or good it is. If the owners really feel like, well, this is actually not that good, even though our eyes and our kind of what the sensory inputs tell us something different, then probably you'll have missed games. But I think if what everybody kind of feels, that actually this thing's trending upward, is the reality that actually exists, it's reason to believe, well, maybe there won't be as many missed games as there possibly could be.
Let's not talk about the elephant in the room yet, which is the labor problems. What Give me your state of baseball. I know that's almost this is like an impossible question. Don't talk about one thing that could really affect this, but what is the
Sure.
state of baseball right now?
I think more than at any other time in the tenure of Rob Manfred as commissioner, who took over in 2015, it everyone feels more positive. For a number of years there, you go back to the sign stealing scandals, and there was problems with service time manipulation. The first half of Rob Manfred's tenure was really checkered, and then he introduces these rules to speed up the game, um, and they work really well. They did their diligent testing in the minor leagues for them. You have Shohei Ohtani, you've got Aaron Judge, you've got this great crop of stars at the moment, and Ohtani, of course, is on a different level. Earlier this year, I was one of the authors of a story at The Athletic about whether baseball had surpassed basketball as kind of the quote unquote number two sport in America. I think for clearly NFL is number one in terms of ratings, revenue, really any metric you want. And for a time there, I think a lot of people would have said it's basketball, but basketball's kind of struggled with some of the areas that baseball has. The takeover of 3-pointers being kind of the analog to what was going on in baseball with the rise in strikeouts and home runs, and baseball's kind of had a correction there to the actual on-field product. And so the one caveat I'd offer is the owners look around and say, well, our franchise values are not growing at the same rate, at least not across the board, as they are in the NBA and the NFL. And they would love for them to be greater. But that piece aside, the overall worth of the franchise, which is still not bad, they're all in the billions. Things are looking up.
It's I love that you bring up that story on has it taken over basketball. You didn't say how you came out on that. Has it taken over basketball?
We talked to a bunch of different experts, people who have some insight into this, whether they're kind of researchers and marketing, and I, there was I think it wasn't a total consensus, but there was a strong body of evidence that in these different ways, baseball is doing better. The NBA's kind of social media presence, that's still much stronger than baseball. But I think the overall takeaway from the story was, if baseball hasn't overtaken basketball, it certainly hasn't in a few areas. So there's you can make the argument now for baseball as a number two, whereas I think a couple years ago you really couldn't have.
Evan, I love your answer because for the longest time, basketball has always sort of just instituted pretty massive changes. I mean, even going back, they put in a 3-point line, and then you have defensive 3 seconds, and they make really significant changes, on a dime. And if you talk to some basketball folks, I wish we could. They say, I wish we could be like baseball and institute sort of the changes that baseball has made, because they brought in. I mean, if you talk to a traditionalist, the idea of putting a clock on the on baseball is abhorrent. I hated the idea at first of the shift. Like, why would you ban the shift? I have 9 players. I can put those 9. The pitcher has to be on the mound, the catcher behind the plate, and the other 7 can be wherever I want to put them. Right. And they did it. I haven't missed the shift once since they banned the shift. It's just been a really interesting changeover to me in terms of baseball being more innovative, and I'm picking on basketball. It's really all the other sports to kind of look and say, like, I wish we could do what baseball did there.
Right, and you see Adam Silver, what was it, a couple months ago, kind of trying to take the bull by the horns with tanking in the NBA, and kind of doing it at a juncture when I don't follow basketball as closely. You wouldn't necessarily expect that's the point in time when a commissioner is going to try to make a major change like that. And so it almost becomes more reactive. The flip side of it, where baseball wishes it could be basketball, is the worth of the national media deals, as you know, as well as anybody. Uh, and so there's still areas where baseball is looking at basketball and going, I want to be like that. I think there's been a few points over Rob Manfred's time here where their actions have looked like they're trying to mirror the NBA, where Rob basically wants to follow Adam. And then on the other side, on the on-field side, I think now it's the opposite, where Adam probably wants to follow Rob. But if to go back to kind of the original point, you go back to the start of Rob Manfred's tenure, nobody was talking about, is there anything Rob Manfred is doing better than Adam Silver? And that part of the conversation is new. That I think there are things people can say, yeah, baseball has done this better than basketball.
Let's talk about the week that was. All-Star game. Fox put they had a World Cup lead in, and the viewership was pretty good for the game. It didn't really seem to resonate a ton. I mean, people that were that were there described it as boring. A couple of first inning runs and then and whatnot. The home run derby, first time on Netflix, an exciting derby this year. Partly because Kyle Schwarber, was a hometown kid that made the finals. Numbers were down a little bit on Netflix as well. You've seen the NBA tinker with like U.S. versus the world type games. You've seen the NHL tinker with that as well. How committed is baseball to having American League versus National League and a home run derby in the day preceding it?
There's clearly a willingness to play with the format. Just look at the Derby. They had a change this year. I think going to Netflix was a part of that, where they went away from the clock system for every hitter that they had for basically a decade, and went back to something similar to what existed in the past in a swing system. And Rob Manfred's clearly been willing to tinker with various parts of the game. I mean, even something as, I don't want to say silly, because some people take it very seriously. The uniforms, if you go back a few years ago, were a big deal because.
By the way, don't take that. Don't call that silly. I hated those. I love seeing the home and the away uniforms out there. I love it. Yeah.
Right, and I'm with you. I'd rather see the players wearing their actual jerseys rather than kind of a uniform, single American League or National League jersey. And baseball, finally heeded that and understood that. And they're pretty reactive, baseball is, to what fans tell them. That they're trying to meet people where they are and give them what they're looking for. And I think they're open to all sorts of possible changes. The idea to me at first blush of something other than the AL versus NL format, I think that could be risky. There are kind of degrees of traditional fixtures in the sport. And look, they brought the DH to the National League, so I guess you could probably do anything. The one thing that's clear that Manfred himself said the day of the All-Star game is that they're not happy with the availability of players. There's this Sunday pitcher exception where the guy pitches on a Sunday, the Sunday before the All-Star game. He can't appear in the All-Star game 2 days later on the Tuesday. And Manfred acknowledged teams are using this, kind of leveraging this exception in a way that does lessen the product. You want, just as they want for the Olympics in 2028, the most best players to be able to show up to your All-Star game, just as they want for the potential Olympics in 28. So I would certainly expect MLB to be looking at and is already looking at, well, what can we do to get more players to the All-Star game so that you really have your best in that quote unquote midsummer classic?
Yeah, I agree with you. Everything that you said is sort of like, let's tinker with the format a little bit. The MLB All Star Game, among all the major professional sports, is still the granddaddy of them all. It's still the one that resonates out there, and I don't get any sense inside MLB. Certainly not inside Fox, and definitely not inside Netflix this week either. That there are massive changes that need to be made to the game or or the home run derby. But there is some tinkering that needs to take effect. Um, you brought up LA 28 and the Olympics coming off the World Baseball Classic. Everybody's expecting the U.S. The major league players. I was going to say U.S. players, but the major league players to play in the Olympics. But that is this is my lead in to let's talk about the labor problems
Yeah.
because that is I guess the Players Association, in my view, is using that as a chit to try to get something elsewhere, because it seems to be something the players do want to do. It seems to be something that fans want to do, and it's something that I feel is somewhat inevitable. But it is there is some disagreement on that now.
Look, I agree that it's inevitable. There's disagreement at the outset of the negotiation between the league, the union, and there's a third party involved here, which is LA 28, the organizers, and then kind of through them, the IOC is involved, and to a little degree, WBSC, the World Baseball Softball Confederation. So it's a larger conversation than just MLB and the union here. But in an analog to what's going on with the regular CBA talks, you're at the start. The owners are saying this is what we want. The players are saying this is what we want. The players want as much accommodation as possible, as many tickets as available, the best hotel rooms as possible, as many tickets for family and friends as possible. Kind of the things you would expect. The interesting, kind of notable piece of the league proposal on participation to the players was they really want it to be mandatory. Where if you are selected to the All-Star game, to an Olympic team, to one of the 6 teams that will be in the Olympics in 2028, and you choose not to go, you are facing a stiff penalty in the league proposal, which is basically that you're going to have to sit out into 2 weeks into the start of the second half of the season. So the break would begin July 10th for both the All-Star game and the Olympics in 2028. It's going to be one long break. And they're saying if you don't have an excused absence, you can't come back until August 4th. You're in that time, you're not getting pay, you're not getting service time. I don't expect the players union to agree to that provision.
Well, let me interrupt
Whether
you right
there's
here.
some.
Why would that be a provision? Is there a sense that people are going to say no? I don't want to play for my country in the Olympics. That doesn't seem
Look,
to be what happens in any other sport.
I think there are some guys who, if in any population as large as the number of baseball players you have, you're gonna have some guys who are gonna go, "I'm tired. We're in a pennant race. I'd rather go see my wife and kids for a couple days." You do have this extended break, and I think there is a fear on the owner's side that, look, if we're gonna agree to do this, we're gonna disrupt the season, and we're gonna basically have this window of time where players are still paid, presumably, and they got to work out that. But I don't expect that the guys who don't go to the Olympics are just not going to be paid in that time. Well, your highest paid, best named player decides I don't want to go. Well, that's a lot of money that's just kind of sitting there that you're still paying them. And for what? And the whole point of going to the Olympics is this is a showcase for the sport, and you want your best out there. And the same issues that exist with the All-Star game. You don't want to go to the Olympics and look at the rosters and say, well, where's this guy? Where's that guy? Where's that guy? It lessens the whole thing. And so I certainly understand where MLB is coming from, and I also understand where the players are going. You can't act. This is not conscription. You can't make us really do this. But could there be some sort of agreement where if you're going to skip, it's got to be for a really strong reason? Yeah, I think that's understandable why the owners are looking to do that.
To me, so let's talk about labor now. I've taken the tact where the, covering labor disputes, there's so much you can write about. And I've just kind of decided I'm going to stay at a 50,000 foot view. I'm not going to talk during the All-Star week. You had Rob Manfred and Bruce Meyer throwing bombs at each other, essentially on the record, which makes for a great copy. But for me, the overriding stories, they're far apart. They're from reaching any kind of settlement or any kind of deal, and they should be far apart because they're still many months. Look, you're a journalist. I like the deadline pressure creates creates sentences and stories and um, moving forward. Um, but my takeaway from this is just the idea that baseball, the union, the business partners that are attached to baseball. When I say 100% of them, 100% of the people I talk to, not one of them sort of hedged and said, "Well, we'll see. There's going to be some sort of lockout or work stoppage December 1st," and the question is sort of how long that ends up going. How do you see this shaking out? Again, staying at like a 50,000 foot level, and then we'll go and dive in a little bit later.
Yeah, look, it's possible in a different world, in a different setting, that at the very start of a labor negotiation, and baseball once upon a time was able to do this, that you could see the sides moving a little bit more closely together. The reality of the world today in baseball is that this is going to be a long process that does go down to the wire. It is, it's 150%, whatever number you want to put, well above 100% expectation that there will be a lockout on December 1st, because there will not be a deal done by that point in time. Uh, and just like last time. And the question then, as you're pointing out, becomes, do they find a way to preserve the entirety of the 2027 season? Do they get a deal done like they did last time in early March? The schedule is going to start a little earlier next year. It might move up things a bit. We wouldn't expect, when one side is asking for as big a change as the owners are, which is a salary cap, for them to really be anywhere close to anything at this point. And so what it sets up in the 50,000 foot view is a waiting game. And things probably aren't going to get real in terms of real movement in the proposals, real movement in the talks, until the spring. Last time when the lockout started in December, there was nothing in December. It was really kind of a little bit happened in January, and then February, and obviously March, when it got done, is when the action picked up here. And so it creates this kind of swirl of, well, everybody's saying this and everybody's saying this, and everybody wants to kind of read into it at this point. You can't. There are things on the edges to try to understand about the different side positions, but in terms of what's actually going to happen, you don't know until push comes to shove. And that's the whole game for everybody involved here, is leverage creation. And it's going to be a rough, 10 months. And hopefully that's all it takes. We'll see.
All right. So right now the owners are totally unified. They want to get a salary cap in there. They want to institute a salary floors, or I don't think they want to institute that salary. They realize that they're going to have to institute a salary floor if they're going to get a salary cap. On the other side, the players appear to be completely unified about, that's the third rail. We will not accept a salary cap. And so your job and my job is to sort of figure out where the fissures are going to be, who's going to sort of break first. And this is really hard for me to handicap, because MLB has a media deal coming the following year. That's a hugely important media deal. So that would suggest that the owners, some of the owners are going to say, you know what, let's kick this can down the road and fight that battle later. On the other hand, the idea of the salary floor, benefiting, look, the Bryce Harpers and Shoheis and Aaron Judges of the world, they don't want the salary cap, but there's, there is a huge percentage of players, the rank and file players, where the salary floor is really going to be financially beneficial to them. So I can see where fissures could happen there as well. And I don't know which one is going to be first, which one is going to be deeper. And that to me is sort of the thing that I'm looking at the most to see, in order to handicap where this is all going to shake out.
I think this is an important point about unity and projections of unity. The only thing that the players and the owners, both any side in a labor negotiation, are incentivized to do at this point is project strength. It doesn't even matter whether that strength is real. And I'm not doubting that it is. At this point in time, why wouldn't it be? But you can stand there and say, we're strong, we're strong. They're never going to stand there and say, we're not sure about this. We think we might cave in a couple months here. And so,
by the way, I have a
back.
distinct memory. I was in college during the NFL strike back, I think it was in '87, and they would interview the players. And I remember Dexter Manley was on the Redskins at the time, and he was like, I can hold out 2 more weeks. It's like, you're not helping matters.
Right.
The owners are hearing that.
Right. And look, I think there's less of that today, and again, that's where it's going to become a March and a spring conversation of, how great is the unity actually is something we're going to find out here. And I think on the owner side, there is an interest to potentially test how great the historic unity of the players union is today. The players were willing to fight for a no salary cap for a span of 232 days in 1994-95. They took down the World Series in that strike. That is a very long gone group of players. Is it possible that if a month of time was missed here, that the players would not hold together? Certainly what the union's leadership and players are thus far projecting is no, we're not going to cave, and certainly would never cave quickly. The owners might feel it's worth seeing whether that's the case. There's a big difference potentially between an entire missed season and a month or 2 missed, and then you still come back and you play a shortened schedule and you play a World Series. The damage you do to the sport in terms of turning fans away, in terms of those national media deals that need to be renegotiated for 2029, I think is pretty directly proportional to the amount of time you ultimately end up missing. And there's one interesting piece of history here, which is that if you look back at the last negotiation, the players voted 26-12 to take the deal. 8 of the no votes, so 8 of the 12 votes that said no, were this group that worked particularly closely with the union leadership, the executive subcommittee. The owners have looked at that and gone, okay, so the guys who were most intertwined with the union decided, we don't want to play, and everybody else outruled them. The rank and file said, we want to go play. I think there's a feeling amongst the owners, well, if we sweeten the salary cap and push comes to shove near the start of the season, well, these guys might just cave. They might just decide, they want to play. And the union's position, Bruce Meyer, the head of the union, addressed this at the All-Star game and kind of explained why that thinking is not the most accurate. And his point was there were 2 occasions before this final deal was accepted in 2022 where the players said, okay, you want to cancel games? Cancel games. And then it happened again. You want to cancel games? Go ahead and cancel games. And then the owners, increasingly improved the deal. And that's what led to the players accepting the deal as Meyer described it. But that's the question. Can players be swayed? Could the owners eventually find enough people who look at whatever they over time put in this thing to sweeten it to go, oh man, it's not worth fighting? The history is the players are going to fight for a long time. The task the owners have is whether they can change that.
But by the way, your point is so good about, and it's what I heard too from, again, media executives, sponsor executives, just the money around baseball is like, if we lose games in April and May, nobody's crying any tears. Those are tough games to to sell. Those are games that don't generally rate very well for television. It's like if all of a sudden, I mean, the next All-Star game is supposed to be in Wrigley. If all of a sudden like that's in Barrel, then that pressure starts to amp up a little bit as well. This is an impossible question to ask, but we're on a pod and we're gonna throw some predictions out. How many games do you expect is a realistic number of games before a season gets knocked out?
Meaning the number of games that would have to be missed before
Like,
you say we just can't play a season?
yeah, is it if you go into August, is it like, all right, we're done here?
Um, Look, in 2020 they played a as memory serves a 60. I think it was 60 games. It was a very truncated schedule. So you could probably do whatever you wanted at the if the sides were to agree to it. Would in August and September season, some fans will still show up. I think where it starts to look silly is probably once you get below 100 games. 2 months missed of the season is probably the limit to where people would be like, all right, this is absurd. But there's been an example of a split season in baseball before. So I wouldn't rule out much of anything in terms of what they could do if the broadcast, if the rights holders are willing to pay and they've got people to show up at the stadiums, whatever, go play 60 games, I guess. But I don't think they want that. And there's a point in these local TV deals where you got to start giving back money for those teams who are still on a traditional local TV deal anyway. And so I think it's kind of an exponential risk where the early going, okay, but once you get to the middle of the year, once you start messing with the All-Star game and you talk about August, you either got to play or not at that point.
Basketball as a 82 game season, and there's a lot of people that want it to be cut to maybe 70 games or maybe even 60 games. And 162 game season, that's a lot of games. Is there any movement, any sense that baseball would go back to 154 or go back, or maybe even like drop it further than that?
I've taken to telling my colleague Ken Rosenthal often that all the world is labor. And I don't know where that popped into my head outside of some sort of Shakespearean influence. But the answer to that is it would have to be negotiated. The players aren't going to want to give up the salary that's part of their deals. But the owners, I think there is an interest that everybody has on some level to play fewer games. Whether that's 150 or something, maybe it's not a huge drop off. But the owners are going to say, well, we're not going to pay you as much. And the players are going to say, no, we want to be paid in full there. And so I think that's always going to prevent it, barring a major change of heart on one side or a major system change. I don't see it as a likely thing to come up. Not in the current world we're in, John.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the media deal for a second. And I'm not so interested in the national packages. I mean, I think the World Series, October playoffs are they not only produce pretty good viewership, but they take over the cities that they're in. It's from a media perspective, they're really valuable. I'm virtually certain Fox is going to want to keep it. I know ESPN has an interest in getting the World Series on ESPN. It wouldn't surprise me to see the streamers jump in on that. I mean, that to me is sort of like a typical national media deals that I write about all the time. You've been covering quite a bit this local TV package that MLB is putting together. For what's unique about MLB is that you have Yes Network. You have Nesson, who produces this show, of course. You have Sportsnet LA, which carries this show, actually, so as well. they don't want to be part of this package and help fund the Twins and the Royals and the Orioles, all these sort of smaller market teams. What is that package going to look like in your mind in 2028 when this comes to market?
Well, in terms of ability for the league to bear a bundle of local rights is kind of, because there's a second component here, which is that as part of the salary cap proposal that the league has made, they want the clubs to newly share their local media money, which is a huge development if that were ever to come to pass, to have the Dodgers and the Yankees and every big market team equally put their money into the same pot as the Marlins and the Rays, and go down the list. The tricky thing there is, what could MLB do if they don't get a cap? And so, in a way, the answer, unfortunately, to what that package will look like is really dependent on what happens in the labor negotiation. Because there are things MLB is willing to do with its local rights that it probably would not be willing to do, at least not in the same way, outside of a salary cap system. And so, you know, the more what Rob Manfred would like is to have the ability for his office to sell as many games, to basically control the local distribution, and take more games national, right? So the number of games I believe right now that any given team, that the Red Sox could have go national in a given year, I think is about 16, 17, 18, somewhere in there. The new system, it's not clear exactly what the number is, but he wants more games to go to the streamers, to Amazon, to Peacock, whoever it might end up being, thereby reducing the amount of local inventory. And he'd also like the local teams, as many of them as possible, I believe, to be able to be bundled and say, okay, Netflix, you want 20 teams, you want 25 teams. If MLB has access to those rights, here you go. And so instead of tuning into your traditional regional sports network, your Netflix becomes your regional sports network, essentially. But how much he's able to do here is all going to depend on what they agree to in revenue sharing. Revenue sharing goes through collective bargaining with the players. And so that local landscape for 2027, 28 and beyond, it's kind of anybody's guess at this point how far they're able to take it.
So what you're saying is that, because in my mind, this holdup was from the big market teams that don't want to be part of the package, and then you'd have to go forward with a 20 package team. But you're saying just as big of a holdup on this is the CBA and the revenue sharing from the players.
Yeah, look, I think if let's say the world stays the same, there isn't a salary cap and you don't get this big change. The question for the local teams at that point will be, how many clubs are willing to join up together and allow the league to sell. The league right now has, I think, 14 teams are with MLB this year, where MLB is literally their broadcast partner, and that number could increase over time, depending on the expiration of other contracts. And so the potential for those 20 whatever teams to be sold as one bundle is still there in the current system. But you're hitting the nail on the head. Whether the Dodgers would participate, the Yankees, even in the new world, let's say the owners got a salary cap in this big revised revenue sharing system. The Dodgers still have an existing contract with Sportsnet LA. They'd either have to totally rework that contract or get out of that contract, I think, to be able to participate in some sort of, all 30 bundle. The idea of one place being able to effectively sell the streaming rights to every local broadcast, I think, is probably pie in the sky for a number of years. Could you get closer and closer? Could you get, not just the 15 teams that MLB has the rights to now? Could you get up to into the 20s? Yes, but how far it all goes, I think, really depends on the CBA.
My view is that it's going to be really hard to talk these big market clubs into coming and doing it. And so baseball is going to go forward with how many ever teams. And I am a big believer in the popularity of baseball locally, despite the collapse of Main Street Sports and some RSNs, the TV ratings of these games and just the general interest in these games is through the roof. As I have no doubt that any kind of local package, if they have a local package, it's going to be the number one show in Kansas City whenever the Royals play, or Minnesota whenever the Twins play, and that's going to grow. And then eventually you're going to see the Yankees and the Cubs and the Dodgers sort of decide, we do want to be a part of that. And I also think that in 2028, when they come to market, that's going to be, I was surprised to see that ESPN didn't have much competition when it got this little 3-year deal. I can see YouTube being interested in it. I can see Amazon being interested in it. ESPN obviously has an interest in it. It's, if you want to grow a streaming service, this seems to me to be the perfect way to do it. But I have really one last question for you. We talked, Evan, about a week ago, and you happened to be in the great state of Maryland, and you were in Baltimore, and you had texted me. I'm a bit of a crab cake snob and a crab cake aficionado. Baltimore. I'm from DC. It pains me to say this, but Baltimore has the best crab cakes. Where did you end up going?
So I went with my girlfriend, who's spent a lot of time in Baltimore, and she knows the good spots as well. We went to LP Steamers, which is actually a place that I, over the years, have come to enjoy. But I regretted not getting the crab cake there broiled. We got it fried. It was still good. I think the largest standout.
Come on, yeah.
We you live and you learn. And the largest standout I thought was Fadley's. That little kind of mustardy consistency and taste to it, and just the proportion of thick, lumpy crab meat was really great.
Fadley's is a top. Also, the price at Fadley's is great compared to the others. I was trying to steer you to Coco's as well, and then of course there's the Costas Inn that's out there. So there's so many. You can't go wrong. I think Ken Rosenthal had told you G&M, right?
He said G&M. You said, yeah. Everybody was telling me in a different direction, and I just didn't have enough time. I will say we went to go pick crabs at Nick's, and I shouldn't say this, but the little cup of drawn butter, I was holding it at one point entirely down the shirt, and so it was such an amateur move. You couldn't have been more of a tourist at that point when the butter is just all over your shirt.
Everybody does it differently, but butter, that's for lobster. You got to do the vinegar. Anyway, Evan, always great to have you on. Thanks a ton. Good luck for the second half of the season, and I'm sure I'll see you soon.
Thanks, John.
That conversation you just heard, that mirrors just about every conversation that I had last week in Philadelphia during the baseball all-star game, during the home run derby. Everybody knows that there's going to be a work stoppage after December 1st. That's when the CBA runs out. But everybody takes a look at baseball and says what momentum it has. It's doing really well right now. Attendance up, ratings up, everything is up. So I want to thank Evan for joining us this week and walking us through that. More importantly, though, I want to thank you for listening to The Varsity, an Odyssey podcast in partnership with Puck. I also want to acknowledge executive editors from Puck, Gabi Grossman, Ben Landy, John Kelly, the great Bob Tabador from Odyssey, and Nesson's Greg Poth, who did yeoman's work once again on this one. If you like this podcast, make sure to sign up for our newsletter. It's also called The Varsity. Go to puck.news, use the code word The Varsity, all one word, for a 20% discount, and we'll see you on Wednesday.